Tēnā koutou katoa. Thank
Kia
you.
ora nā. Right, move on to local board. There is no local board input. Extraordinary item. Look, there is an extraordinary item. It's a minor one, but it is one in regards to the standing orders. And that extraordinary business is mahurangi. So I'm going to put the extraordinary business that when Mace Ward gets here, and it's the purchase of mahurangi to include that with the regional park. So they're going to come through. It's a good news story. It's something that at least we can get and have a presentation on. So if that is okay with everybody, it won't take long. Yes?
Nature of it was, does it need to be done today for legal purposes, or why not we don't?
Yeah. There's no legal...
But it's just
there's nothing
information.
legal. It's really coming through as a result of the purchase that we've had, which is one of the biggest purchases that we've actually had.
Yeah, I get
but
that.
that's why, and as we've just been told, it's only a minor extraordinary business which can be done under standing orders.
Happy to second.
Yeah, okay then. So look, I'm going to move that the extraordinary business be there. It's minor, but there is a presentation. It's a good news story. So I'll move it. Councillor Watts has seconded it. All those in favour?
Aye.
Against? Carried. So look, there's one other thing I'm going to end up sort of letting the committee know is that the presidents of our agenda items, when Mace gets here, I will be moving the extraordinary business from item 15 up until when we complete the agenda item that we're on. So that'll be done when Mace gets here. So we'll move on to item 8. As per our agenda, and it's the Regional Event Fund Grants Allocation Round 2 Strategic Priorities. So I just want to call our staff up, please, and I'll allow them to introduce themselves to everybody. Kia ora.
Kia ora tātou. I'm Catherine George. I'm the Regional Funding Advisor for Arts, Community and Events. Do you want to introduce first?
Oh, sorry. Kia ora, David Burt. I'm the events manager within the Arts, Community and Events Department.
Kia ora koutou. I'm David McIntosh, Senior Advisor Events within Arts, Community and Events.
Thanks. Yeah, kia ora, thank you. Before we start the consideration of the events and then the community development report, I'm just going to give a really brief overview of the regional grants programs that are considered by this committee from the Arts, Community and Events unit, because it's new and you're a new committee, and we've got some faces who were on the Community Development and Safety Committee that considered these grants, new from local boards, so it's a really good opportunity just to all head off on the same page. So, all of Council's contestable grants are guided by my very well used copy of the Community Grants Policy. So this policy covers local board grants, incorporating multi-board grants, and also the regional grants. So having this policy is an explicit announcement from Council that often community groups are the best people to deliver actions into our communities. There are lots of independent groups, as we've heard just now from Boopsy, who are in many places better able to deliver to our communities than maybe Council's is. So the regional grants programs are where the local board grants are quite specific, quite sometimes just line by line. These grants are a little bit more strategic, and their contributions to overall costs of things that are happening within the community that's really showing Council's support for these programs. So the regional grants programs that are administered by the ACE unit that we'll be presenting to you this year are the Regional Arts and Culture Grants Program, which will be coming to you in April, and today the Community Development Grants Program and the Events Grants. So we have this overarching policy that covers everything. And then within each of the grants programs, we have other policies that inform the grants that are used throughout the units. So we have the regional events policy. For community development, we have the Empowered Communities approach, Thriving Communities, Community and Social Development Action Plan, and I Am Auckland, the Auckland-wide Strategic Action Plan for children and young people. So all of the grants are considered bearing those in mind as well. Arts and Culture uses Toi Whitiki, the Arts and Culture Strategic Action Plan. And I think that the Thriving Communities Plan really encapsulates the aims of these regional community grants programs. It says Auckland Council's role is to enable, facilitate and provide every opportunity for communities to drive and own their own development. And so by providing community groups and organisations with direct financial assistance, Council can support the objectives that we all share. So these programs and these grants are complementary to other work that Council is doing. It's complementary to local board grants, it's complementary to programs and projects that Council directly delivers, and also funding that comes through CCOs such as ATEED, Panuku and Regional Facilities Auckland. So in some cases there'll be contributions for specific things from each of these areas. So that's the policies that cover. Each of the grants, the process has a slightly different process because they're all unique, but they all start with a really robust assessment matrix or weighting system that gives an initial priority for grants, and also includes feedback from subject matter experts from within Council and external. So we seek a lot of information and we use really robust processes that are based on good grant making, really. So then onto the priorities for each of these grants. The criteria are informed by the community grants policy, but each grants program also has priorities that have been agreed by the governing body or its representative committee. So these grants, the events grants, are the second round of grants for this financial year. The first round were considered by the Community Development and Safety Committee last year. The regional community development grants, there's just one each year. So these have been assessed and these recommendations are made based on the criteria and the priorities that were agreed to by the previous Community Development and Safety Committee. So they're all following on from that advice from councillors. The priorities, for example, the regional events, they have, in addition to the priorities that were outlined in the events policy, the Community Development and Safety Committee identified Māori, youth events, winter and low season events, and other gaps in the funding calendar, focusing on Pacifica and diverse communities as additional priorities. So that's taken into account with these recommendations. The regional community development grants look at the empowered communities approach, responding to Māori aspirations, social inclusion and equity, building community capacity and developing and supporting community-led placemaking. In addition, the Community Development and Safety Committee identified supporting Māori outcomes, social innovation, community collaboration, and transformative social change and reach. So that was lots of words from me, but I really just wanted to show that we really follow a very robust process before what you've got in front of you comes to you, and we're always really interested to hear from councillors. We will be holding a workshop later in the year to look at the new funding priorities that will be identified by this committee for the regional grants going forward.
Good. Thank you so much. Questions? Councillor Hills?
Kia ora, and thank you.
Hello.
And yeah, thank you for always having a really robust process. And sorry, this time I didn't get to visit the applications, which I usually try to.
Right.
I've said it before, and I'll say it again. I know you can only deal with the applications you get, but there is a disparity again. I think in August, we did have some more from South. That was good, but this time we only have. We seem to always have a lower number of applications coming from South and West, and I think somehow we need to do a bit more work in trying to draw them out, because I know it's great to have the regional events in the central and the north, but I know that often the groups in my area are really good at filling up the applications
Yeah.
really quickly and getting them in and getting the strategic. And I just don't know whether people are missing this in the south, but I'm sure there's a ton of things that reach the criteria as well that could be happening. And so how we get maybe the local boards to encourage, or maybe these groups just think they only need to apply to the local boards and not to the regional, because they might not see it as a regional attractor. So I just don't know how it's happened for a couple of years now where we're just not getting those applications. You guys can only deal with the applications you're getting in, but how can we kind of lift the south and west a bit?
Yeah. Okay, right. I'll pass this over to David as the events thing, or he might want to actually refer to it once you've been through the events report, maybe in a
sorry.
little bit more detail. That's all right. That's a really good point. Thank you.
Kia ora.
Kia ora.
So I just have a question around the criteria and the priority in the reports given to Māori, I was really disappointed that the application from the Māori Maternal Mental Health Hui, with the lineup that they've got involved, Te Kaho Te Rangatahi being one of them, right in the heart of Manurewa, Richard, out south, and they were declined. I understand the fact that we've maxed out on the money, but for the sake of $2,000 that they were after, Māori being a priority, the social change that you just talked about, how did they get left off?
Kia ora.
That's my first question.
Tony, thank you. I'll leave that again because this is something that David will be covering when they discuss the events. Really, I'm just giving an overview, and they'll have the specific things behind that which they're able to inform you on.
Okay,
Thank
so
you.
therefore in
Yep.
the process of determining this, what role do you see the Independent Māori Statutory Board having? If any, have they had any?
Well,
so
it
far?
would be great. I have put, last year with Arts and Culture, I've put some offers through to the Independent Māori Statutory Board for somebody to be on the Arts and Culture. We have a grants panel that assess the grants before they come through to you to represent on that. And I think that time, the timing just didn't work out.
Okay, so there's been no involvement?
Well, no, I have offered. So, so we'll definitely look at that. Look at that continuing through again, or if you'd like us to come and make a representation or anything that you'd like to do, we're always really interested in hearing.
I'd be really keen
further.
that the Secretariat of the Independent Māori Statutory Board get involved in the determinations that the officers have come up
Great.
with. The fact that they haven't been involved in this process so far through the chair, I think is not acceptable. We're all busy.
Yeah.
We're all busy, all right? We just got to try harder because we miss out. There's a whole proportion. If we want to talk treaty obligations, Article 3, that's a classic where it's been missed out.
Okay, that's great. I'll be much more bossy with my future invitations.
Yeah, no, look, for you, the invitation was extended, but at least now it's been tabled.
Yeah.
And then at least let's look at what happens from here
Yeah,
in regards to it. So, got Councillor Cooper, Dalton.
Kia ora mātua. My question is, talking about especially our people in the west and the south, and we're saying, well, maybe it's difficult for them. Don't we have community brokers on every local board? Wouldn't that be a perfect role for them? I don't know what they do because they don't talk to councillors pretty much, but wouldn't that be a fantastic role for them? They're from the Community Empowerment Unit. They could be out there. They know what's on the ground. They get out with these groups. That could be part of their role. So I'm just passing that on as a suggestion because we've got the resource there. And the other one is, it's just questions? Okay, so my question is around the 46,000 for the, I suppose, is that,
We haven't come to
we're not come to that?
Yeah. Just if there were maybe any more questions, just in the general, with your thing about
Okay,
the
so no,
brokers
well,
was great.
no, I can, well, we're having two sets of questions. Okay.
Next one, we'll just move on if there's any questions.
Yeah.
It's answered by David and David.
Yeah.
So, Councillor Dalton.
Mine was about Māori as well, which I have a personal view, and that is, sorry, Councillor. have a personal view, and that is that there shouldn't be regional grants. The group that Tony is speaking about would have received that grant from the Manawatu Local Board. So local boards reach capacity. My question actually is around point 39, and that is the measurement of those events with a Māori focus. I just wonder, I did have this question when I was in local board about how we measure outcomes for Māori as a success rate, percentage of total round value. So what are we saying here, that of all the applications that came through and were funded, we got to 24% because of, and that is taking into consideration the audience, is it?
Yeah.
Because I'm assuming that that would
Yeah.
pump up the numbers.
Yeah, thank you. Look, Councillor Filipiana, maybe through the chair we'll pass over to, see, all the questions do seem to be specifically about the events grants program. So I'll probably pass over to David and David, who have prepared this report, and they're the experts
Before you do that,
in that area.
I just want to make sure, so Councillor Mulholland, is your question related to in specific events that David and David need to answer, or is your question specifically for around the policy and the preamble we've just gone through?
Related to policy and preamble.
Yep.
Kia ora, and nice to see you, and it was good to have the opportunity to have a look at the grants and meet with the team, so ka pai on that work. So my question in part relates to commentary by Councillor Cooper. I believe, from my observation from my past life as a chair, that a lot of work and hard mahi goes into information sharing about the process of grants. I've actually seen Pepe, who is involved with the Whai Local Board, constantly promoting and engaging with the wider community on the basis of applications. So I'm proud to say that in the Whai, which is not just Western, I think people confuse the Whai a lot. We're not Westies, we are actually a combination of New Windsor, Blockhouse Bay, Green Bay, so it is a wide community. But do you believe that perhaps there needs to be additional education and information and support to further assist staff who are doing a great job at information sharing, to help organisations to understand that there is that opportunity? Because I have observed, actually, there has been opportunity made.
Kia ora, Councillor Mulholland, thank you. Yes, I believe that the great thing about these grants being administered by arts community events is that we cover all those staff who are, looking at being brokers and things like that. So as I said, there are the local board grants and the multi-board grants, which are covering those very local events or programs or activities. And then these regional grants have specific criteria where they need to actually reach right across Auckland or draw an audience from right across Auckland, and often are the ones that are too big for a local board to manage to be able to fund effectively, so there'll be both of those. So I think that that's a really great point, and I will definitely have a think about how we can get some really good advice out to all those local advisors around really clarifying where these grants lay, and so that they're really keen that they can say to people, hey, this is beyond our scope, how about looking at this committee? The difficulty is always the pressure on the funds, but I think that's a great point, thank you.
Mr Chair, supplementary, because actually in terms of your answer, I don't believe I got quite the full answer to my question. My question was, do you think, because I stated quite clearly that the staff are doing the best they can, they are actually sharing these opportunities, do you think we need additional support to give further education to staff in the offices, for example, the local board, to help them engage with community to better understand?
I think that probably some of the boards maybe have better capacity than others. I've said it's not my focus is these regional grants programs, but I'm always happy to offer any kind of grants, support and advice also to local boards and to any staff that want that.
Councillor Newman.
Thank you, Mr Chair, and good morning. It's a repetition of an old argument, I guess, from me on this. With respect to the requested funding versus the recommended funding, there's sometimes the gaps are massive. And it goes to people are applying for funding because they need that funding. They don't need a portion of the funding, they need the funding. And yeah, it can be sometimes there's degrees, but actually often it's binary. And if they don't get the funding, the event isn't going to happen, or it's going to be very difficult to deliver the event. But we seem to have an apportionment of the funding to stretch it out, stretch. The reality is that you want the event to take place. So what happens, I mean, presumably you've triaged with all of these people to say, well, look, if the officers only recommend X, you're going to be able to fund the shortfall. Why don't we, I know that we do want to stretch the funding, but why don't we just decide to go and deliver some events and say, well, this is what we're going to do with our money, and we can't always stretch every last dollar. We're not going to ask you to stretch every last dollar, event A and event B. We're going to just fund you. Why don't we look at that rather than just trying to be all things to all people? Because some of the funding amounts that you recommended are way below what is required, I presume, for the event to be successful.
I'll pass that over to David and David, who did these recommendations for the events.
Yes, Councillor Newman.
David, sorry.
Do you,
Daniel, there's about 3 that they will be responding to with Matuakake, Councillors Cooper, Dalton, and I'm assuming you've written down the questions that they asked, because like we've done now, we've moved into sort of one and the other. So if we could get, I just wanted, David, before you do, I just want to end up getting answers to the 3 previous ones first before Councillor Newman's, because and then I've still got Councillor Collins to go, and I don't know whether it's around an event. It is? No. Around the policy, the guidelines, eh?
Okay.
Yep. So look, if we do that, we'll do the guidelines as we started.
Yeah.
And then we'll get the event questions out of the way from both Davids. Okay, is that right, Councillor Newman? Yeah. So policy guidelines question, Councillor Collins.
Yeah, I'm starting to wonder if it's kind of both now, Chair. Sorry, now that I think about it.
Ask
Throw the
anyway.
both, and then I'm just going to
Maybe I can just include it. Thanks, Chair. You're very good.
I've got 5 of them here
okay.
that both Davids will answer
Yeah.
in the order.
Thank you, Chair. And it really just picks up on the points that have already been made. I'm interested because to dovetail into the question is, how do we make the policy guidelines known clearly? I know that there are groups within staff that go out and have the funding forums so that people understand it. And I just wonder, when Councillor Hills was talking about the discrepancy of applications from, say, the south and the west, we know that that's the governance issue is a base issue we have in ECE governance. We know that a lot of Pacific providers of ECE are falling over, and it's always around governance and administration, that kind of thing. So I'm interested to see what work is being done or being partnered so that people do get a full understanding of the information. And just for noting as well, I've already noted it by email, but there's an application in here that I'm an advisor to, and even out south with Otara Health. So you're getting certain groups apply because we have the kind of capacity to apply, but we can't be left to just 1 or 2 groups. It's all kind of tied into what others have asked.
Kia ora, Fessel, I think that will be a great question for Christine Olsen from the Community Empowerment Unit to look at when you're looking at those grants. For example, one of the grants there is that Auckland Accounting project for Māori and Pacific groups, which is about capacity building for, for those groups. I guess we do the best that we can to make these, but I think Christine might have a little bit more inside info on what council staff are actually doing around that.
Okay, so now we're going to go back to both David Burt and David McIntosh. Firstly, there was an answer required for Matuakake in regards to it, and I think David McIntosh was going to answer that, so I'll leave that one. And then you've got the event question from Councillors Cooper, Dalton and Newman, and there may be some tie-in with Councillor Collins.
Kia ora. So just on the question of the Maori mental health, maternal health application, basically the reason for declining that was it's out of scope for the events funding. So we're not funding professional conferences or meetings. Our event funding is more about community events where we're getting people together, sharing sort of memorable occasions in the community, celebrating special occasions, that sort of thing. So have had similar applications in the past, predominantly in the youth development area, and we've declined those because it's sort of the scope is too wide and it's not indicated as a priority in the events policy.
So just as a supplementary or a response then I challenged the whole definition and criteria around the Māori outcomes, the social change that was specifically commented on before. If you really understand, it's Māori maternal mental health, which is, we've got to put emphasis into those first 1,000 years of our babies being born. Otherwise, what is this? Take the community out of this name of this committee. I don't agree.
I guess it's sort of, I'm not disputing the value of the activity that they're performing. It's just that it's not within our area of funding. So sort of our outcomes in terms of how they relate to Māori, it's bringing Māori together and undertaking activities that they as a community want to do. This is broad-based sort of activities, and you can see as in terms of the types of examples that we've got here, a lot of it's audience-based. That's where our focus is. So iwi of origin, good example of that type of thing. And
I think through the chair, we're not going to agree today, but which is why my first process question was get the Independent Māori Statutory Board Secretariat involved in earlier on, which didn't happen.
So look, that point's been taken on board. The invitation was extended for one reason or another, didn't happen, but at least it's now been highlighted now, and that's been taken on board. So that's fine. Councillor Cooper, I know you, and we're going to get into comments after this, but yeah, okay then.
I wasn't talking about the fact of promotion. I'm talking about, when I'm talking about our community brokers, is actually having the ability for people to go to sit in their local board and get help, even if they're helping doing a wider regional thing. That's what I'm talking about, which is the more resources. Anyway, but I'll leave the other thing because I'm sure other people are going to bring up the AC36 application.
Councillor Dalton's question in regards to, one was the events and
I
then...
think has been answered by Tony, actually. That's the same thing. The only thing I'd add as well as the IMSB is that there is a good look at the Māori outcomes framework as well in terms of the criteria for applications for delivering on outcomes for Māori.
Perhaps I could just respond. Absolutely agree with you that we need more input in the Māori space. Last year we did have a good discussion with the Māori Statutory Board. We haven't really followed that up, and I admit that. So we need to do more in that area. We need as much input as we can, addressing, it's not just in the Māori space, but also in the geographical distribution of the grants. In the west and the south, we have the same issue with the wonderful Auckland Heritage Festival. We struggle to get participation across the whole of Auckland. So if councillors have suggestions that can follow up that we can work on, then we'll take all that on board because we'd love to see greater participation. I think just if I can pick up Councillor Newman's question, I really agree with you wholeheartedly. It's a difficult balance to make a judgment as to should the ratepayer basically fund 100% of an event, and sometimes that decision is made by local boards because they decide in their community that through their funding they will either ask us to implement it with local board money, or it'll happen with a grant made at the local level. They're in position to judge that. When we judge these events, we have to balance, is it better to be dominant by ratepayer funding, or can the community or the commercial sector pick up some of the cost? And that's a balance. It's not clear cut. You just have to work through and make some judgment calls and bring them to a governance situation like this for you to make some of those calls, but it is difficult. Thank you.
Councillor Newman.
So in your determination of the recommendations, are these applicants aware of, are they aware at what time are they aware of your recommendation, and that the subsequent expectation of them when you prepare that recommendation is that there is a shortfall that they will either find a way to meet or cut and slice and dice the event to accommodate a revised budget?
It varies. We have a number of commercial, especially in, I can think of a few in the multi-sport area, that they ring and we discuss it with them, and we have follow-up discussions, and I mean, they admit, look, if I can get the funding from the council, it's easier than necessarily going to the commercial sponsors. So what do you think my chances are? I mean, I think I've been in the events game for 20 years. You know a lot of the people in the business, so you discuss those things. So I can't give you an unequivocal that 100% of the time we're talking to individual applicants, but we do talk to most of them and try to make that assessment.
Any comments? Sorry, questions or comment? Both, Wayne?
I'm picking up on comments.
Oh, yeah, Councillor Walker.
Make a comment. The observation I make is that a significant number of these events that we've been funding for some time, and almost without exception, they're all growing, so there's a measure of success there. Quite obviously, it's important to have stability and certainty and continuity. Obviously, you've got issues around branding associated with most of these. The consequence is that going forward, we're always going to have limited money to fund new things. I guess there's an exception here around the AC36 event, and that's probably taking up that amount of discretion that we've got. So unless we actually increase the budget, we've got an issue. We need to support these existing events. We don't want them to fail, because it's really hard getting these things up off the ground, and we've invested a significant amount of effort into what we're funding to date. So that's what I want to put on the table, Mr. Chair.
No, I agree.
And that context doesn't necessarily come through in the commentary from the officers. My suggestion is in a future round, it would be desirable to have more emphasis around that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Walker. Look, it's been moved by Councillor Casey, seconded by Councillor Darby. Yep, seconded by Councillor Darby. There's no further. I'm going to, before I put the recommendation, just wanted to sort of say, Catherine, in regards to the 2 days that you ended up having the drop-in. So thank you for that, because it allows councillors who take up that opportunity to ask the question. So just want to say thank you, and it was in everybody's diary, so thank you to that. So I will put the recommendation. All those in favour? Aye. Against?